Restoring your boundaries after narcissistic intrusions. Did you have to drop everything when your parent walked into a room and pay attention to them? Do you show appreciation when someone shares their opinion about your choices, even if you disagree? When someone takes over something you are doing, does it feel impossible to tell them to stop? One of the ways that narcissists negatively impact others is through their intrusiveness. They often regard their ideas, opinions, and perceptions as superior and others as inferior. So they confuse intruding on said others with their point of view for a favor they are offering. In the narcissist's mind, they are gifting the inferior person with guidance that will make the other person's life better. The other person must show gratitude or face the narcissist's wrath or withdrawal. This feature of narcissistic psychology is particularly harmful for the scapegoat child. The narcissistic parent uses this child to embody the intolerable worthlessness within themselves. This process of devaluing the scapegoat child often includes regular intrusions. The scapegoat child has no choice but to permit these intrusions. That child's survival strategy comes at the expense of getting to feel like they are in charge of themselves. Well, in today's video, I explain how the scapegoat child adapts to the narcissistic parent's intrusions. The child must adopt a belief that others' needs are more important than their own. The narcissistic parent's needs include finding the scapegoat child to be inadequate or inferior. So it's not just that others' needs for care are more important, but also others' needs to devalue the child are more important than the child's. And I'll use several case examples to illustrate this process. Last, I'll offer a tactic to learn that others can stay warm and connected even when you exercise your right to say no. Well, my name is Jay Reed and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California, and I specialize in helping people recover from narcissistic abuse. This is a form of abuse that can leave us feeling lost and estranged from our sense of who we are in the world. And through individual therapy, a book, and my online course on recovery from narcissistic abuse, I try to offer a map that allows survivors to come back to the quality of life they know they deserve. And of course, each survivor must travel the path themselves. I think a map can be tremendously useful along the way. And there are three features on the map that I call the 3 pillars to recovery. First pillar is making sense of what happened so you know it wasn't your fault. Pillar number 2 is gaining distance from the narcissistic abuser, whether that's psychological, emotional, or even physical distance. And pillar number 3 is living in defiance of the narcissist rules. And lastly, I don't think we can do this in a vacuum. I think it also is essential to find and participate in communities of people who can get, support, and validate you along the way. I'm also happy to say that I've recently published a book on Amazon called Growing Up as a Scapegoat to a Narcissistic Parent, A Guide to Healing. And this book is a collection of essays that are organized into these 3 pillars of recovery. My hope is that the reader can turn to this volume for encouragement, validation, and support along their own path towards a better quality of life. You can find the link to the book's Amazon page in the description box below, or by clicking here. Also, if you prefer, you can start with my free ebook called Surviving Narcissistic Abuse as a Scapegoat. And this book can help you make sense of the abuse to know that it was not your fault. You can also find the link in the description box below or by clicking here. The narcissistic parent's right to intrude. I'd like to start with another kind of anonymized case example. Ed was a 25-year-old bicycle mechanic who was in therapy because he did not feel like the author of his own life. He described his father as someone who was obsessed with status. If his father perceived a work colleague to show him anything but deference, his father would feel wounded. And then he'd come home and take up the family's dinner time with stories of how terrible this colleague was. When Ed was in 7th grade, his father would also take to scrutinizing Ed about his performance in school on such nights. Was Ed doing his homework? What were his latest test grades? And so on. If Ed answered that he got anything less than 100% on a test, his father would say, "Okay, I want to see how you're doing your homework after dinner." And these sessions may have seemed helpful on the surface, but Ed's experience told him otherwise. His father would drone on and tell Ed how he was not doing this and that properly. His father was going to do him the favor of showing him how to get his grades back on track. And then his father would then ask questions which he seemed to know Ed did not know the answer to, and then act astonished that Ed could be so dumb. Well, these sessions went on for 2 hours or more until his father seemed to feel sufficiently superior. And of course, they were excruciating for Ed. In therapy, we broke down more of what Ed's experience was like in these moments. He knew that if he protested his father's help, that he would be in for a world of hurt. His father would likely grow enraged and say that Ed was an ungrateful kid who'd never amount to anything. And that was always scary and hurtful for Ed. So he knew that his father needed to be agreed with when he intruded upon Ed with his opinions like this. When Ed went along with his father, there seemed to be some kind of harmony. Ed's father illustrates how a narcissistic parent will intrude upon their child. His father did this to restore his own sense of superiority that seemed to have gotten punctured when his father was at work. And I think there are 3 reasons the narcissistic parent does this. Intruding boosts the narcissistic parent's sense of superiority. By believing they have a right to intrude, the narcissistic parent reinforces their sense of superiority to the child. And this is a very important outcome to achieve for such a parent. Their self-worth is inflated yet very fragile. This was demonstrated in how easily wounded Ed's father could be when at work. So reinflating their self-worth often happens by intruding into the scapegoat child's life. Doing so means that the parent's needs are more important than the child's. Number 2, the narcissistic parent sees the child as an extension of themselves. The parent uses other people to manage their exhaustive self-esteem needs. They do not see other people as separate persons who deserve respect, interest, and support. When a parent intrudes upon their child's life, they are seeing the child the way they want to. They're not seeing the child based on what the child indicates that he or she needs in that moment. And the way the parent wants to perceive the child is often as a broken down person in dire need of the parent's help / intrusion. The 3rd reason is that the scapegoat child learns their boundaries are meaningless. So the impact of these intrusions on the scapegoat child is to learn that it is futile to say no. Doing so will only result in indignant rage or hostile withdrawal by the parent. Harmony with the narcissistic parent requires the scapegoat child to surrender their boundaries. They do not have a right to object when someone else wants something from them. As the child operates this way, the narcissistic parent can more easily see themselves as superior and the child as an extension of that parent. The scapegoat child's dilemma. Children have an inherent need to see a gleam in their parent's eye when they walk in the room. Such experiences let the child know that their existence is welcome and cherished. This is an essential ingredient to developing an authentic self that feels lovable. The child of a narcissistic parent does not often experience this, if at all. Although the child does not receive the narcissistic parent's gleam, they still want to know that they can make the parent happy. The narcissistic parent may react with goodwill, or at least the absence of ill will, when the child permits such intrusions. Ed's father seemed pleased when Ed reacted appreciatively to his guidance. This may be the best the scapegoat child can hope for. The narcissistic parent's happiness is a self-centered one. The parent is happy when others comply and unhappy when they do not. Allowing the parent's intrusions is the closest the child can come to making their parent happy with the child. The scapegoat child's dilemma then is that the parent's intrusions are offensive, but a boundary will only make the parent unhappy with that child. Making the parent unhappy has 2 bad consequences for the child. They face the parent's wrath or withdrawal, and they may feel unlovable by not being able to make the parent happy with them. On the other hand, if they do what makes the parent happy, the child makes themselves unhappy. That is, they lose a sense of their right to choose when they say no or yes. The child needs a solution to this dilemma. The scapegoat child solution. Children with an intrusive narcissistic parent can solve this dilemma by adopting the belief that others' needs are more important than their own. Now the narcissistic parent is doing nothing wrong by ignoring the child's boundaries. What the parent needs takes precedence over what the child needs. When the scapegoat child adopts this belief, they face a particularly insidious situation. The role of the scapegoat child is to embody the worthless feelings the narcissistic parent feels but cannot tolerate. So the parent's need in this case is for the child to feel less than the parent. The child has to facilitate the parent's cruelty towards them because the parent's needs are what are important. If the child was not in the scapegoat role, then the parent's needs may be less malevolent. Yes, it would be problematic for the child to have to put the parent's emotional well-being before the child's own, and the child could certainly conclude within themselves that they are worth less than the parent. But when the parent's need is for the scapegoat child to feel worse than the parent, then the child must sacrifice their emotional well-being for that parent. Doing so meets the parent's, I think, rather cruel need. As this persists, the scapegoat child may come to associate intrusiveness with closeness or connection. The belief that others' needs are more important may lead them towards exploitative people. Having a friend or partner who intrudes on them is familiar. Putting up with such treatment may come with a sense of relief that they will not be attacked nor abandoned. So back to the case example, at Ed's job, he'd find himself freezing up whenever the bike shop's owner came around. In therapy, he described feeling like it was inevitable that the owner would find a flaw in Ed's work and take over. Ed might even try to get ahead of this and ask the owner a question about how to do this or that, even if Ed already knew how to do that. Well, in therapy, we discuss how Ed's presentation of himself as not knowing as much as the owner was useful at one point in his life. If the owner's intrusion felt inevitable, then doing this would minimize its disruptive effects. The cost was Ed's sense of competence at his job and even the owner's perception of Ed's competence. However, Ed had learned from his father that others want to see him as incompetent so they can intrude with demonstrations of how competent they are. Recovering your boundaries. The scapegoat child learned that their parent grew hostile or distant when the child said no. The best way to practice setting boundaries, I believe, is to do so with people who react with warmth and connection when you do this. Doing so allows your system to decouple setting boundaries from getting rejected. You learn that your boundaries can actually enhance good relationships. With such practice under your belt, I think it can then be easier to set boundaries in more sort of toxic relationships. In these relationships, it is likely that the other will be rejecting in response to you setting a boundary. And if you suffered traumatic levels of rejection from a narcissistic parent, then this can be re-traumatizing. It often does not matter how healthy you cognitively know it is to set boundaries with a toxic person. It can still feel sort of searingly painful to do this. But new experiences of finding and discovering it's safe to set boundaries can create a new belief. Scapegoat survivors can grow to believe that boundaries help others actually meet their needs. Once this new belief is established, the reaction of a toxic person to boundaries may feel a lot less re-traumatizing. The survivor is not setting a boundary while thinking they are committing an offense. Now they set the boundary with the toxic person as though they are giving that person a gift that should actually enhance the relationship. If the toxic person rejects this gift, then that reflects on them and not the scapegoat survivor. Well, thanks for watching today's video. I hope you found it helpful. And again, I want to thank everyone for your continued support and engagement with this channel and the surrounding resources around it, the course, the book, ebook, and free webinar. And again, the comments just are just incredible to read each and every week. And I just greatly appreciate them. So with that, I look forward to posting again next week, next Friday. Take care.